This is kind of an interesting subtopic because as much favor as we gave up with Great Britain with Jay's Treaty, we're going to earn back when we talk about gaining favor with Spain. So this is going to be totally the opposite. Where we had to give everything to get a pledge of no war from Great Britain, with Spain, we're going to get everything for a pledge of not joining Great Britain in the war. Because the news of Jay's Treaty between the United States and Great Britain was kind of a big blow to Spain. Because Spain had just signed to be allies with France. So Spain knew they were going to be going to war with Great Britain now. What they didn't want was America to jump in on the side of Great Britain. Even though they knew they didn't know we wanted to stay neutral, they were afraid we would. So Spain needed to do something to ensure that America would remain neutral and not fight on the side of Great Britain. So Spain was very interested in negotiating a treaty. And so in 1795, President Washington sent an American diplomat by the name of Thomas Pinckney to Spain to negotiate a treaty with that country. So in 1795, President Washington sent an American diplomat by the name of Thomas Pinckney to Spain to negotiate a treaty with that country. The difference between John Jay's negotiation and Thomas Pinckney's negotiation is Pinckney was to negotiate items that would be favorable to the United States in exchange for us telling Spain, we will not join Great Britain against you in war. So it was just the opposite. Okay? So what did Spain get out of this treaty? A guarantee we wouldn't join Great Britain and go to war. The United States received 3 really good things out of this particular treaty. The first thing had to do with a disputed boundary that separated Georgia and Florida. This boundary right here had been disputed for a long period of time. So because who did Florida belong to? Spain. So this border ended up being negotiated favorably to the United States. My saying that is that you see the border right here? Probably it would have been up in this area if we wouldn't have negotiated this treaty. So one thing that the United States got out of this treaty with Spain was a favorable border between Georgia and Spanish-controlled Florida. A favorable border between Georgia and Spanish-controlled Florida. Now the second thing we got out of this kind of had to do with this. There had been several unwarranted Indian attacks upon citizens of Georgia prior to the revolution, independence, and afterwards. So the second thing that Spain promised to do is bring in military support to curb these Indian attacks against citizens of Georgia by the Indians that were living in Florida. So Spain agreed to curb Indian attacks upon settlements in Georgia that was going on at the time. Those were fairly significant things, but the third thing we received was the big one. We received the right of deposit of the Mississippi River. We received the right of deposit on the Mississippi River. Now, remember we talked about how these settlers decided to grow corn because it was too hard to travel their supplies across the Appalachians east, and they decided to grow corn for liquor? The reason why is because I was surprised some kid didn't say, well, Mr. Deere, why didn't they just go down the Mississippi out Louisiana, New Orleans, and go around? That would have probably been easier, right? Which it would have been. The trouble was, who owned the Mississippi River and New Orleans? Spain. So we had no right of deposit at that time. So the thing we really gained by this treaty with Spain is the ability to navigate the Mississippi River and have the right of deposit to use New Orleans to get out and get around, and it helped our trade with the western lands tremendously. Okay? So we received the right of deposit to use and navigate the Mississippi River and New Orleans. Does that make sense? We didn't have that before. That was big. So that's what we gained when we talk about gaining favor with Spain. We promised not to join the British side. They promised to settle the border in our favor between Georgia and Florida. They promised to curb the Indian attacks that are going on in that area. And they give us the right of deposit to navigate the Mississippi River and use the port of New Orleans. Okay? Perfect. All right, that is going to take us to President Washington farewell address. President Washington's farewell address. Okay. The election of 1796 is coming up. And President Washington decides he's not going to try to run or serve a third term. So, as a result of that, we are going to summarize the 4 major accomplishments that occurred during his 2 terms in office. During his presidency, what major accomplishments occurred? Anybody want to guess what one of them was? What did he do during the 8 years? Okay, he created and organized the machinery of government. He created and organized the machinery of government. He got a judicial system put in place, right? Laws. He developed a constitution. Okay, so he organized the machinery of government. What else did he accomplish that was big? Where were we when he took over? What was one of our big problems? Money. So he set the new nation on solid foundations financially. He set the new nation on sound foundation financially. Got us back in good stead. Paid off our debts, set up a system of tax, created a bank to put the tax money in, we're rolling. Another thing he did is he avoided war with Great Britain when war could least be afforded. That might have been the bigger thing he did, late anyway, is he kept us out of war with Great Britain when we couldn't afford to go to war. If we go to war with Great Britain at this time, who knows if we're standing here talking about this in history class in 2017. Okay? So he avoided war with Great Britain when war could least be afforded. And the last thing he did is he received some tremendous benefits from Spain, did he not? Especially that right of deposit. So the 4 major accomplishments of the Washington presidency is he established and organized the machinery of government. He set the new nation on solid foundations financially. He avoided war with Great Britain when war could least be afforded. And he received benefits from Spain. However, when Washington left office, he had 2 major concerns. 2 things that really bothered him. 2 things that really bothered him. First of all, he was very troubled by the sharp, bitter disagreements between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. He was very troubled by the sharp, bitter differences of opinion between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. What was he seeing here? Split in the country between North and South. He really was. He was concerned about that. Really bothered him that those 2 men, each representing different sections of the country, could not get along. They had such different philosophies. Second thing that he was really concerned about was the relations of the United States with foreign countries. Our relationship as a country with foreign countries. He was very concerned about our relationships with foreign countries. Now, when he gave his farewell address to Congress, he really urged the American people to avoid these 2 things. Avoid these 2 things. He really urged the American people to avoid these 2 things. The first thing is he really said avoid any permanent alliances with foreign countries. Avoid any permanent alliances. with foreign countries. Have we got in trouble with that before? Do you think France thought the Treaty of 1778 was a permanent alliance? Sure they did. And he warned them. He said, don't get in permanent alliances with countries. Don't get into something for life. Okay? Make sure it's clear. The second thing that he warned against was the formation of political parties. Where did that come from? The bitter disagreements between Hamilton and Jefferson. He could see this split coming. And he very much warned the American people, do not form political parties. Which is ironic. Ms. Peyton, what's our next subtopic? The rise of a two-party system. And so they immediately after his farewell address do the exact opposite of what he thinks should be done. He warned against the rise of the two-party system or the formation of political parties. And what do? Well, we're going to tell you. Okay? So, rise of the two-party system. So, despite his recommendation, political parties appeared in American politics in 1796. 1796, political parties started to appear. And who do you think these two political parties centered around? Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, just as Washington had predicted. So the two parties would center around two personalities of Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Hamilton and his supporters in the North became known as the Federalists. The Federalists. And Jefferson and his supporters in the South became known as Republicans. Now don't get that confused with the Republican Party we have today, because there's been a lot of changes over the last 200 years on that. So Hamilton and his supporters, and these are on your ID sheet, became known as Federalists, and Jefferson and his supporters became known as Republicans. And obviously there was a lot of differences of opinion. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the Federalist Party and tell you what their beliefs were. And then you can compare those with the Republican Party. So here are the beliefs, philosophies, etc. of the Federalist Party. Number one, the Federalist Party had little faith in the ability of the average person to govern themselves. The Federalist Party had little faith in the ability of the average person to govern themselves. They had little faith in the ability of the average person to govern themselves. Number two, the Federalist Party wanted to give power to wealthy people. The Federalist Party was all about giving power to wealthy people. Number three, the Federalist Party wanted to create a strong federal government. They wanted to create a strong federal government. The Federalist Party, number four, supported the Bank of the United States. They supported the Bank of the United States. Number five, geographically speaking, the Federalist Party came from New England and the Eastern Seaboard. New England and the Eastern Seaboard. What type of people lived in New England and the Eastern Seaboard? Rich people, that's right. Rich people. So geographically speaking, the party was strongest in New England and along the Atlantic seaboard. Number six, the type of people that belonged to the Federalist Party were wealthy merchants, lawyers, manufacturers, and church leaders. Okay, wealthy merchants, lawyers, manufacturers, and church leaders. Now, this is kind of sums up the Federalist Party, number 7. This is how they describe themselves. This isn't me telling you what my perspective is or what anybody else's perspective was. This is how they describe themselves. The Federalists said that they represented, quote, the rich, the well-born, and the able. That's what they said in their own statement, that they believed that their party represented, quote, the rich, the well-born, and the able. There's your Federalist Party in a nutshell. Okay? Now let's compare that to the Republican Party and see if they have any similarities at all. Okay? Now, the Republican Party, number 1, had great faith in the ability of the average person to govern themselves. They had great faith in the ability of the average person to run themselves. A little bit opposite than the Federalist Party. Okay. Number 2, the Republican Party favored limited federal government. They favored limited federal government. So number 2, they favor limited federal government. So number 3, they would favor strong what? State governments. So the Republicans are going to favor limited federal government and strong state government. 3 being strong state government. Number 4, geographically, where would these people live? Everywhere except for New England and the Eastern Seaboard. And a lot of them lived where? On the frontier, farmers. A lot of them lived on the frontier, west of the Appalachians. Matter of fact, the Republican Party said they had great faith in the ability of the average person, right, to govern themselves. Anybody want to guess what percent of the population of the United States of America were considered the average person at this time?
67.
Good guess.
32.
Bad guess.
91.
Getting closer.
100.
90. 90% of the population in the United States of America, were of the average person. Only 10% represent the rich and wealthy. So you can imagine the Federalist Party is a little outnumbered. No wonder they want the rich and wealthy to run the country. They're outnumbered 9-1. Would that be correct? Which one are we on? Number what? 5. Number 5, the party was obviously against the Bank of the United States. They were against the Bank of the United States. So there are your differences between the Federalist Party and the Republican Party.
Why were they against the bank?
Because, we'll get to that, but they saw it as corrupt, only benefiting wealthy people. But we'll get into that, it's a good question. No, so overall, historians say by 1800, most voters in the United States had chosen what? Had chosen a political party, one way or the other. So by 1800, most Americans said they were either Federalist or Republican. Now, from this point on, kiddos, in American history, political life is going to revolve around the two-party system, just like it is today. Now, there's going to be some changes in names and philosophies. Now, when you think about the Electoral College, the big scramble now is to make sure that if you are a Federalist, you can get as many rich people as you can elected to Congress, because you're the one voting, right? Because you think of this, 90% of the people are average, well, they'll win every election. Not necessarily. Okay, you gotta think about some of that. We'll get into that a little bit later. Okay, what's our next subtopic there, Navy girl? The election of 1796. So this will be the first election in American history in which we have
Party.
No,
political parties. Very good. Okay, so during the election, both political parties pick their candidates. So this is going to be an interesting scenario because we don't have it perfected yet. For the Federalists, they nominate John Adams for president and Thomas Pinckney, remember who went to Spain to negotiate, for vice president. So on the Federalist ticket will be John Adams for president and Thomas Pinckney for vice president. The Republicans countered with Thomas Jefferson for president and Aaron Burr for vice president. So now you're running on tickets. Guess what didn't change?
The percentage of people.
Oh.
How they
Think about our election before.
Whoever won the second amount of votes got to be vice president.
That's right. We still haven't changed the fact that the top vote getter is president and the second highest total of votes was named vice president. Now during this election, most people expected that voters would either vote both Federalist candidates or they would vote both Republican candidates. That was basically what was said. Well, when the ballots were totaled, Aaron Burr received 30 votes. And he ran with? How much?